Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? Let's get going with a little webinar. What do you say? Um, this is part of our little intro to CAD sort of series, intended to kind of fill a pretty good gap. We got a lot of things planned out for a little collection of webinars. So actually chances are the person listening to me right now is probably listening to the recorded version of this, which is good because you can watch this over and over and really learn a lot of cool techniques with CAD. We'll be talking about blocks and layers today. The recording, like I mentioned, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to follow along with it again. And the other important housekeeping item for you is that Q&A button at the bottom. I would definitely recommend just go ahead and click that button right now. Get that question and answer box situated on your screen because it makes a great little companion. Not only is it going to be a little faster for you to type in a question, but you're going to be able to see the answers that I type to other people's questions. So it really kind of helps as you're watching along live. That's all I have for my little housekeeping items. I'm going to get this handed over to Jake and we are going to get our learning on. Let's go, Jake.
All right, thanks, Chair. So welcome, guys. I want to preface this whole thing by saying there's going to be so much to cover within these two items, blocks and layers. So if you do have any questions, like Jared said, please start getting those in now because we are going to be doing quite a bit of stuff. While this is going to be pretty basic, we are going to get into a few technical things. So I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes with what we could do with blocks and layers. So trying to stay on focus with a few things. If you can get those questions to us, that we can kind of sort those out, figure out where we go. That would be super great. So this is me. And if you've watched one of my webinars before, you know who I am. So we are going to get going. The outline for today, we are going to be covering from a very basic standpoint, what a layer is, what a block is, and then just really everything with working with each of those items. And if we can get down to it, really how Land Effects handles these two items as well. So we are going to be focusing more on the CAD function side of things. We'll probably integrate a little bit of Land Effects magic in the in between a couple of the tools and whatnot, but what we're going to try to do is just really understand the concepts of how CAD functions and works with these layers and blocks. So as my good friend Bob and Crystal always say, we are going to take baby steps. So with starting with those basics, what is a layer? And if you were ever to look at a plan and see something like this, you're going to see all kinds of complicated, potentially complicated stuff. And really, how is that all made up? And that layer definition really is just at the most simplest point, a way to organize objects in that drawing. If we're going to kind of pull this apart, you're going to see that what would be ideal and the function of these layers is to really break stuff out by specific items. And so you can see that we have baseline work, and we have our plants, and we have our labels and hatches and amenities. All those kind of things really make up a plan, but we really want to focus on organizing those, and how we organize those is going to help speed up our processes and how efficient we are with working. So if you're going to look at these things side by side, if you're really questioning the benefits of layers, on the left there, this is the same exact plan. But as we start to dive into presenting, you know, the final plan to the client, or giving this plan to a contractor to read, what is it that we're trying to portray? And so this irrigation plan is a great example of something that I've seen far too often, is that there's no difference with like the background information, maybe the corresponding planting plan, all that kind of stuff is either lumped into one file, or even if it was XREF properly, that there was no adjustments to the layers, which makes it really, really hard to read. And so it doesn't have to be as simple as the trees have specific layers, or the symbols have specific layers, but even for the case where we have masks on callouts and how legible it is to actually read any of this stuff, you can see just right off the bat in this case, legibility is key, showing off some of these callouts and different bits of information. So layers absolutely is the foundation of what it is that we're talking about here. So a block, as you can probably see, same example here. We're not moving on very much further other than now taking those layers, taking those lines, taking those hatches, and grouping them together. And grouping those together are going to allow us to manipulate and function as one specific object. So if you're going to take a look at any one of these little arrow points here, those are all different blocks. And if we're going to sort of break this down a little bit differently here, if you're going to look at this left versus right picture and tell me if you see the difference, aesthetically, you might not. And at the end of the day, you might say, I'm totally fine with either of these. But which one is going to be easier to work with? And this is one of the main benefits of a block, is how it actually functions within the system. So I can tell you right off the bat, if I had to move any of these trees or shrubs, I would want to be working with the ones on the left. So a couple other block benefits that we don't really need to touch too hard here is the repetitive task stuff, all the things that you're going to be doing while designing, moving, changing, deleting, all that kind of stuff is one of the key points of a block. And of course, not to mention all the accuracy improvements. And if you're the CAD manager or even your own manager and you're trying to maintain those standards of what you're using time after time in each project, in each design, that they are standard and they come in the same every time. And then of course, using those blocks, and I'm going to throw out this term a few times throughout this, is the block definition or the layer definition. It gets stored into AutoCAD, and AutoCAD keeps those and it caches those names of the specific items so that it can reuse it. And for that purpose, it also helps reduce those file sizes as well. So, all right, so this next little section is somewhat of a touchy point, but just something to consider. While we are setting up the layers that should be used or the block namings that we should be used, all that kind of stuff, just a few things to consider as you were trying to set that stuff up. Or if you've got it in place, maybe to kind of think or restructure what you got going on. The pain points that I'm talking about really are the things that you don't like doing, or you find maybe should be done a little bit faster or could be done faster. Really the second bullet point is one of my biggest things, is what are we trying to achieve with those layers and blocks? I think far too often we have these different firms and different municipalities that say you have to use this layer naming standard, and trying to get to the root cause of why, what are we trying to achieve with that? Is it an organization standpoint? What is it? Because that does kind of play into these next points that I'll bring up. But from a naming convention standpoint, and then the complying with this national CAD standards, this NCS, is something that's pretty key. And they have, again, a really nice starting point from a standard layer naming and from a line thickness standpoint for those layers, for the colors that are being used. And we comply with this. If you're looking at land effects, or if you're already using land effects and wondering why we have our layers named the way that we do, it does follow this basic format. So just keeping in mind that it does need some structure. And once it does have the structure, does it work well with others? Can we easily work with another firm? Can we migrate over to their standard to work on a project with them, or can we share a file and can they understand what's going on in our drawing? So this is really important for a couple of reasons, obviously. Organization is going to be absolutely key as we start to do the larger projects that you do. The more important that organizing and identifying all of these layers and blocks and stuff and working with them is going to be. So the identifiers, those discipline designators that you see here in this image here, again, is one of those key items that you can start seeing in this list of layers as you get a file from somebody else, that you can start understanding if it is an important layer that you need to work with or not. But further, it's a lot easier to troubleshoot. Troubleshooting and trying to identify what's wrong with either a layer, why it's not coming out properly, knowing where to go to find it is really, really important. And then, of course, this final decision that you're coming up with this structure, it really does impact how it functions within AutoCAD. The definition, the block definition or the layer definition, if you're using something that is so generic that somebody else might be using it, but your blocks are different, that's where we start running into problems where CAD already thinks it's there, so you try to bring in yours and it doesn't really work very well because it thinks it's already there. So, and we'll try to kind of show those in a little bit. But I think the last part of this, and ties really well with all of the layer kind of stuff, is that we're only going to be focusing on the Ctb style of things right now. And Ctb is that color plot style that really takes the working drawing, the layers that you've assigned to things and the colors you've assigned to those layers, and it converts it into what it's going to look like when you plot it out. So taking a look at our defaults, we have this, and you can see, if you kind of recall that that NCS standard where we have specific thicknesses, but within each one of those thickness categories, those line weight categories, we have several different colors. And you might think, well, I don't need that many colors for that same thickness, right? But the color, again, having the ability to have several colors apply to a specific thickness allows you to make your plan a little bit more varied from the colors that you use. So maybe cars have a different color than benches, maybe those have a different color than your sight line work, but you still want to share a similar thickness to things. And the goal of that is to, as you're drafting, easily identify what layer things are on. When you're doing a plan and you see that everything has red on it, and then you come to find out that somebody has manually changed that layer's color to red instead of keeping it by layer, that's when we start getting into this rabbit hole of trying to find out what's plotting right, what's by layer, what's manually colored, and that kind of stuff. So just having this kind of set up to have several different options to choose from is super important.
And we did just mention the national CAD standards, and of course, a lot of people tend to go, well, wait a minute, you say national CAD standards with one sentence, and then of course these layer colors are completely not national CAD standards. And I still stand by that myself, in case anyone is an NCS fan. They basically still claim two things that I think are horrible, which is, one is basically try to use only 6 colors, and the other is to use color yellow as a primary color. And I think both of those are horrible decisions. And so that was what led to, our formation of these colors, is that for landscape architecture, you're going to need just simply more colors, exactly as Jake said. And, very early on, of course, black background back with release 12, we go, well, you should never use yellow because you're going to be looking at a white background occasionally, and you can't see yellow at all. And so just don't use yellow. And so you can see the only yellow that we have is that dark yellow at a very, very rarely used line weight. So yes, this is not NCS, but you could, if you wanted to, use the strict National Cad Standards only using color 1 through 7 madness. But I think it's also, if I can get to a very quick point eventually, this is just a great example of different offices have different standards, and this is kind of what we did, but we still are going to try to follow a lot of those NCS dictates with the layer naming, with the organization of things. Even though some aspects are going to have to vary, and that's just the beauty of CAD, if you will. But okay, I'll stop babbling.
No, that's a great point, Jarrett. And the thing to really point out too is the fact that while we don't adhere to their exact colors, we follow the same structure from things need to have specific line weights, and they're defined very close to, and we have a naming structure that you can follow very easily, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, so how does it actually turn into this black and white, so to speak, and then thickness? And this all is about the plot style. So as you in an office might be using something that was already set up for you and you've never really touched bases on this, as you go to plot, there's going to be a plot style table assignment, and you get to drop that down. You get to pick whatever you want that might be in the list there. But if you were to select any one of those and edit him, you're going to get to this form view. And this is really where all of the assignments happen for any of the colors. And when we talk about colors, we are talking about a couple different things. The index colors is really what focuses on the black and white, and they have a color 1 through 255. And if you're at all familiar with CAD, you're going to understand the terminology index color, and know that if I pick an index color, it's going to, or it should print in some shade of black. And this is where you get to control that. However, you also have the ability to use true colors, and these true colors can be, so when you do print using this Ctb file and everything is printing black and white, that whatever you assign to the given layer in your layer property manager, it will sort of ignore that and print as that exact true color. So there are times that we do this in land effects automatically, and there's a set color set for those, but there's also times that you might want to just go in there and manually do that yourself. And so those two things really help kind of dictate this whole plot style thing, and the index colors again is for that line thickness side and how those lines actually display. So just really quick, wanted to kind of show a snapshot of one of our blocks and sort of how that is comprised, and with this whole NCS kind of structure here. So we're talking about the layer names and how to identify stuff. We've identified a structure that again works for our content, and not saying that this is for everybody's liking here, but what we've done is we've made it so that we know we've got identifiers on here that we know that an LK is a landscape block layer. It's a block layer for this K guy right here, and we know it pertains to anything furniture-wise. So as you're placing any of our blocks, we've kept this very standard across the board that if it pertains to the furniture category, it gets a specific identifier, and then it tells us how thick that line should be. So when it's plotted out, you can see what it looks like. And again, staying consistent, but the only thing that changes, we have another layer, but it's for our thinner stuff. And we have a color layer for any of our hatches. And we have any auxiliary stuff that pertain to any portions of this, whether it was this additional texture hatch that we've got going on with these little guys set at different transparencies. And you can see that this one block has 5 different layers in it, which again, some people are like, oh, I just want a block and I don't want to have to go through the layer manager to find stuff. I think it's just more of a, maybe an uncomfortable or not familiar with the layer property manager to not want that many layers. But at the end of the day, what we say is layers really shouldn't matter. You should give yourself the layers that you need to make this block look good or make this content look good, no matter what it consists of. So even with this one little bench, it's 5 layers. So jumping off of layers for a little bit, block naming is a totally different beast. And Jared, if you have any thoughts on this, I'll let you go in a second. But I searched and searched and searched and could not find a dang thing from a standard perspective when it comes to block naming. However, there are some guidelines that are always said, and that's making sure that you are very descriptive in the block. There's a lot of thoughts on fighting whether or not you should be using numbers and letter codes and stuff like that. But here's our little set structure that we've got that really allows the flexibility that we need for the content that we create. So you can see here with that same bench, we're really sticking with a very, very similar method as our layer names, where we have a prefix here of LAFX, and this prefix really is, if we're going to think about back on that slide where it says what your standards, what you choose for your standards is going to affect how it operates in CAD. This is what I'm talking about. If we just had this guy set as a block name as bench or 6-foot bench or whatever it was, there is a very, very high chance that another discipline could be using that block name and it would not pull in or not recognize. Further, it's easier to identify in the block lists and within the drawing itself that this is a land effects block. So we have this very, very quick way of identifying where it came from and what it pertains to. So again, just being able to have different elevation and views of the same block, we're able to put those in from a plan view, elevation front, elevation right side of things and understand what it is, as well as put it into specific categories. It just makes it so easy to expand this block library and to be able to use additional items like our cool shortcut keys for that. So I don't know if you have anything else that you want to chime in on there, Jared, but
Oh, it's just, well, the only real standard we've ever been able to find is the one, the Autodesk does have a standard for any apps that are available in their app store. Any blocks have to have a 4-character prefix that's registered with them. So as you can imagine, we've registered LAFX as our block prefix. And and then that did really help to guide our block naming standard. And the beauty of that is that you should never have any accidentally some block named the same thing, and that's basically what it's about. You want some sort of a uniqueness to it. So yeah, you're kind of sort of a Dewey Decimal System for blocks, and that's what we came up with here.
Perfect. All right, so with that being said, I want to jump right over into CAD. We have again, quite a bit to cover. So are there any questions before moving on from that? Are we good?
No, just well, Jeffrey had a great question on the National Cad Standards, and I did put the PDF and the link there in the
Perfect.
Q&A window that people can look at. So let's get on into
All
CAD.
right. All right. So we're gonna do a snapshot of a final plan for a second, and then we'll get into creating stuff. But I really wanted to start off with understanding where all of this layer stuff happens. And if you were to type layer or LA, or go to your home ribbon and you see your layer properties here, you're going to get this layer property manager here, right? And there's obviously a couple things here. This might be where we kind of get overwhelmed, especially if we're opening up another client's file, and well, how many layers do they have in here, and what does it look like, and how do I manage all of this kind of stuff, and where do I go? That's what I kind of want to just cover really quick is just the ins and outs of this panel here. I'm going to tell you my preference is to take, if it's floating here, if you have another screen that you put it on, that's great. I like to dock my panels off to the side, and I like to auto hide them because it allows me to keep my full screen here, but also hover over it and get there to expand it and see what I need. For this purpose, we are going to keep it open so that we can kind of play around with things without it collapsing. But here we have our filter section. And the filter section, again, and I'll be quite honest, I was a little bit overwhelmed with this stuff in the past and just sort of dismissed it because I didn't really use it. And if you're using land effects, I'm sure you find yourself not really going into the layer manager too much anyways, because it handles it all for you. But I think I'm going to go in here a lot more now after preparing for this one. The filters section is actually really cool. And what I do typically use, and these are somewhat of a standard pre-filter that come. If you've opened up a drawing, you see that you have a non-XREF layer section and an all use section. These are, I use these quite a bit, and it's really awesome to filter this specific list. So I can click on this guy, and these are all the layers within this current drawing, not in the XREFs. All use layers obviously is throughout both XREF and current. And then there is this XREF filter. And what's really nice is if you have several XREFs, you can actually filter to the specific layers within that XREF only. So you can start to see how things are set up very, very easily. So these are standard, but what if you wanted to actually create your own filters? There's two different kinds here. And this group filter is a great one. If I click here, he's going to be group filter 1. So let's just say, just for fun, planting. So I have a planting filter, there's nothing in it, but if I were to go over to all of my my all filter here, or sorry, my non-XREF stuff, so I can just get down to it, we can start to see how things are actually layer named. And if we sort of remember back to those standards, we can see that we know that anything with an LP, that's a landscape planting section. So maybe I want all of these LPs to be in this planting guy. So I'm just going to select them and I'm going to drag them up into that planting guy. So what's really cool is while all non-XREF layers is here, and I can see all those layers, I now have a filter that literally just shows me all of my planting layers. And what's really powerful with this is not only can I just manage individually layers here, but I can right click on the plant group filter that I've done, and I have a lot of additional capabilities. I can freeze all the plant stuff without having to select them all and do this. I can turn those back on. Oh, I gotta unthaw it, sorry. On and off and then freeze. We'll go over that in a second. But I can isolate in any viewports that I've got going on. I can isolate all those trees, and it will put the actual non-plot guy here. So frozen in the viewport. If we go over to one of these tabs here, in these viewport freezes, you can see that they're all gone off of all these layers. So very, very quickly, I can start managing what it is that that we got going on here. So anyways, that is kind of the, we're going to delete this guy here. That's that group guy. And if we were going to look at this other filter, and this one's kind of fun, is this property filter. And this property filter actually allows us to filter based on specific properties. So if I want to do, let's just call this my non-plot filter. I just want to see what I have there. I can go down to this middle section here, and you can see the filter preview of what's going to happen here. And I can choose any layers that are set to non-plot. And you can see this list kind of thin down. We'll just say, okay, this is all of my non-plot layers. So I can have those at the ready if I need to make any changes and stuff like that, and manipulate in just the same way. So past this, I can convert it back to a group filter if I want to, and then I can drag other layers in there, but it does all kinds of cool stuff. So that's just a quick sample of what the filters do. Past this, we've got a couple other things really quick. Obviously, our name of the layer here, the status of the layer, and then a bunch of different things. And a lot of times you can't really see what they say, so you can always hover in between those two things on that column and double click, and it'll expand it to fit that content. So a really, really easy way to do that. Now, you'll notice that I've got actually this freeze panel right here so that my name never goes away, but I can scroll through here. The way that I did that was I basically right-clicked on the header. So typically it'll look like this, but I can right-click on any one of these headers and freeze that column, and it'll freeze at that specific point. So it makes it really nice, and I keep mine obviously on the name only, so that I can kind of expand that name and see it all, but still scroll through all that kind of stuff. So really, really easy ways. A lot of other different options there. But one other thing that I wanted to show in here is if you go to your layer settings, that little gearbox in the top right corner, this is generally unchecked, I believe, but this dialog setting, indicate layers in use. This is actually a really cool one that I've never really paid too much attention to, but indicate layers in use is super helpful because you can filter by this status, and you can see that I have layers in here that actually are not being used, and it's indicated by this gray. Anything that has something on it is indicated by the blue. So I can now filter and see the conditions of what's going on in this. So a lot of just different manipulation types of things in here that help you go through. Now you can make obviously mass changes. You can filter stuff by what's frozen, by what's not frozen, what's locked versus not locked, that kind of stuff here. Sort of by color, all that kind of stuff. But you can also click and drag to select multiple. And then when you go in here and you make an adjustment, it'll apply that adjustment that you do to all of what's selected. So you can make a lot of mass changes very, very quickly. If you wanted to simply unfreeze all of these, you can do that set of highlighted stuff while not unfreezing everything. So a lot of mass changes is really, really easy. But here's where we're going to kind of move over now. I'll kind of close this guy because I don't need him, is we are going to create some layers. So we're here in our layer property manager still, and there are these 4 different buttons up at the top. And this is where you start creating or deleting or setting current your different layers. So if we're going to just make this very, very simple, obviously the little sun is the new layer. This little snowflake is kind of a neat one where you might have all of your viewports set up the way that you want them, and specific layers are frozen so that you don't see them in the specific viewport. This will actually allow you to make a new layer, but it'll make it so that the viewport is frozen so you don't see it, but you can still draw in model space and see everything. So just a quick little setting there. This guy with the little X obviously is our delete. And then to be able to set a layer current, you can do this guy or just simply double click on the layer. So we're gonna go ahead and say new. What you'll notice is that it created it like basically all the settings that were set to layer 0, it pulled all of those settings from that specific item. So we're going to go ahead and make a few tree layers just for fun, or shrub layers. So we'll go ahead and stick with our naming structure here, and we'll say, and we like the 4-digit codes, so you might be getting creative with what you go with, but we're going to go ahead and set just a few things up here. So this is going to be my shrub layer that I'm going to apply to whatever block that I make. And we'll go ahead and choose a different color. And that color that I want is 150 because I know that that's one of my thin line weights. And you can see that I can set a bunch of other things, but I'm going to leave it that way. Now, if I have him selected and I make a new layer, you can see that he obviously pulled now from this guy. So kind of be careful of how you're making them, or just be aware that you're going to be either changing the layer or keeping the layer, but the colors and stuff like that. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and make a couple more layers here. And for speedy purposes, we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll make, oh, I just need one more. So you can make them just like this. I'll go ahead and delete that guy, and then just select him and then select him one more time, and he will go into edit mode so that we can do that. All right, so now I got these guys here. I need to change his colors and change him. All right, so we have our new layers. So what do we do with those layers? Obviously, a lot of times we want to keep those layers in a template so that they always come in, but we have a lot cooler of a tool for that, and that is our Save Layers button. So if we have the layers in the list that we want, they're set to how we want them to be. We can even go ahead and double click him to make him the active guy. I'm going to go ahead and save these layers into our system really quick. And we're going to deal with blocks. And we know that as we create a shrub, we want to be able to pull in the exact layers that are going to be used to create shrubs consistently. So there we go. So once we've created those layers, we can go ahead and we can start kind of creating our block stuff. Now, here's maybe some line work that we had for some other blocks that we wanted to maybe apply the layers to. We can use our Save Layers button and go in to navigate to that section. Here's our shrubs layer set that we've saved in the system. And as soon as I hit, whoops, I should have said load layers. Go into blocks and find our shrubs. And as soon as we say load those layers, it's going to bring in every one of those layers that we just set up. And we can start going ahead and assigning stuff. So just real quick, we'll go ahead and do this. Now, moving stuff, this is all done on layer 0, and you can see in my properties, if I look here, what I've selected is on layer 0. All of this stuff is on layer 0. Don't draft on layer 0. Make sure that you've set your blocks up appropriately to the proper layers and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead, select that stuff, and I can simply, in our quick access toolbar here, if you have this available, you can change the layer here for what's selected, or you can do it in your properties. But we can go ahead and assign the specific layers to the specific lines that we want. And we want that guy to be nice and thick. So now he is basically set up appropriately so that if we were to manipulate any of these things and turn those off, it's going to be respective of those specific layers. So we'll go ahead and save this block, save this line work as a block. So again, if you recall, it doesn't matter sort of what is in the block or what we want in the block, but it does take whatever we ask it to be in a block and put it together into a group. So you can select the items, or you can first type block if you want to create the block and leave it in this drawing, or we can do a write block and write block this content out into its own file. So for now, we're just going to make this a block. So keeping with good form, lefx dash shrub, and we'll say this, why not? Now, you got a couple different options here from a block definition standpoint. It does need to know what your base point is, what this insertion point is going to be. So obviously, maybe we want right in the middle of this plant, of course, and it hasn't detected anything. So we'll go ahead and select the objects that we want a part of this block. And I just right click to get back to the screen. And then a couple other things. So we'll go ahead and say, okay. If you select it now, it is now one entity, and it is here for you to kind of manipulate and use. So we'll go ahead and show you one more, but we're going to do this one a little bit faster here. So we'll go ahead and just simply do a couple modifications to this guy. And while I'm doing this, Jer, is there any questions?
Yeah, we actually got a good question that I think will be covered when we, particularly when you get to talk about CTBs, but just the ability to, lighten a plan just by using a different CTB.
Yep, cool. All right, so I made my changes to this block. I'm going to actually use our save block tool. Now, if you go into either the planting tab, there's under generic, there's save plant block there, or in our preferences there. So if we save a block, it's going to ask you for the same thing, that insertion point. So we'll go ahead and pick the middle. We'll go ahead and select our objects and where we want this guy to be. So we'll go lafx dash shrub dash 01 and save it. So the cool part about saving it into the system, of course, is it's going to be more organized, and it's going to allow us to see a preview and how we kind of want to function with this guy. So we'll go ahead and place him just like this. So now he didn't actually turn into a block, but if you were to actually go to our section of where we saved that, we can now really, really quickly, oops, go to shrubs, really, really quickly place him into the drawing. And you can see that now I can very, very quickly start to manipulate that thing. If we look at our properties, of this item, you can see that there's the block name, and this is again why it's so important to have that kind of stuff applied to it for finding it purposes and redefining it and stuff like that. So there it is in the system. If you do the AutoCAD command classic insert, this is how you typically would insert a block. So it found this block in here, so we're going to go ahead and place him in here, and it'll just pull that block definition that's already in the drawing and place it as it is. So again, that's sort of how insert and saving a block and all that kind of stuff works. Now, let's see here. We are going to do one more thing, show you a quick way. So this might be something that may or may not be something you have to deal with, but if we're going to look at our properties here, you can see that I only have one layer, layer 0, but for some reason I have all of this color. And all of this is on layer 0, but the color was manually set. And believe it or not, I've seen this quite a bit. And it is very, very challenging to deal with this. So trying to, again, use those tools that we just pulled, and we'll go ahead and go to blocks, and this is a tree. So we have specific trees layers that we want to maybe use for this stuff. But to be able to use this other tool, which is Q select or quick select, to be able to see and select that color, and we'll go ahead and do color 123 and have it very quickly look through and find all of color 123 so that we can set this not only to the right layer, but then we can set the color back to by layer. And now it is going to function properly from a management standpoint. So very, very quickly we can go Q select, find color red, find it, change its color, and change them back to by layer. So just again, manipulating maybe an existing block that you have, and using some of those very quick tools to do that. So holy smokes, is our hour almost over already? Jer, come on. So we're gonna
gotta talk faster.
I'm trying, you know. Okay, so now manipulating with stuff, blocks and stuff that are already in drawings, and maybe you have a plan that is just super busy. You know, what kind of tools do you have available to you to kind of clean this up and see the pertinent information? Well, being able to do the adjustments in XREFs is super challenging, and as most of you probably know, trying to use XList to click on something to see what it is, it tells you what the layer is, but now you have to try to go and figure out in the layer property manager where it is and adjust it. We have a tool called XLayer, and XLayer is super awesome because it allows us to not only see what that layer is named, but we can also change its color, and even if we wanted to change its line type, and it modifies it into the XREF itself. So we'll find something that's a little bit easier to see. Say okay, and have it manipulate all that layer throughout the XREF automatically. So XLayer is so cool. A few other very cool tools to manipulate layer colors and stuff like that is FX layer color. Oops. Layer color, let it come up. So FX layer color and change layer colors. these two items are super cool because it's more of a very straight up, I'm going to just take this color and change it across the board kind of thing. So take him, see what he is, change it across the board. It sort of doesn't look at it from a layer perspective, but it lets you change layers across the board very, very easily. And then so is the FX layer color change, or change layer colors, I guess I should say. It allows us to sort of do a mass change. So any yellows that I find, you know, I can change him and say I want them all to go to this guy and modify the entire plan just by simply finding the colors that need to be altered and then editing them to be another color and then saying okay in the entire plan. So very, very cool little tools just like that. Now, when it comes to visibly seeing or not seeing stuff, obviously there is a difference between what's off and what's frozen. And I think the biggest difference that we need to understand is just because something is using the lay off command, it is still actually, CAD is still recognizing it. If you use the lay freeze command, CAD actually uncaches it from its memory. It's still obviously there frozen and it'll come back, but it does not act the same from a memory standpoint, which means it'll drastically speed up your performance if you got a lot of stuff going on. Freezing that will act differently than layers. Further, if you freeze something and then you do a select all, it won't pick it up. Versus if I do a lay off and select all, it'll still select that item and I have a potential to delete things. So freeze is definitely something that CAD ignores more from a content perspective, but keeps it kind of hidden in the background. So how do we use those tools? We have a really, really fun improvement to it's not really new, but an improvement to the normal lay freeze command. This is our super lay freeze. And if you click on this guy, what's really nice is, actually, I should just show you the old command to try and freeze a block, especially even through an XREF. It goes in parts and you don't get all the pieces, and it's just sort of a big pain. Our lay freeze command will identify what that is and freeze the entire block and its contents. So making sort of adjustments and cleanup to your plan is super, super easy because it's going to remove all items pertaining to whatever specific block it is, instead of just by layer, which is super, super nice. Again, being able to undo past that if you've removed too many things. So lay freeze is very, very cool. And then super lay ISO. And if we go ahead and look here, it allows us to do that same thing, to be able to isolate specific items and right click and have the sort of the XREF even stay in place, versus, or we'll go ahead and do lay ISO on this guy. See, it doesn't go through the XREF that way, so it's not taking away the entire XREF itself. But yeah, so very, very cool tools to clean up in that respect. All right. Are there any questions or things that you want me to address before I go into cleaning up stuff?
What was there cleanup things were you thinking?
I've got some purge cool things, how to identify.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, let's see. Let's cover that real quick.
All right, cool. Back, yeah. All right. So you may have something in the drawing that you cannot, for some reason, get out of the plan, and maybe trying to even delete. Let's even go here. go here and find, I placed something in here that I know. Something like this, like maybe I'm trying to delete this layer, and these don't have anything on it, but trying to delete something like this. And you're always going to get something like this. Hey, you can't delete that layer. It's got something on it. And for the life of you, cannot find out where it is. AutoCAD has improved greatly their purge stuff where you can find non-purgeable items. So if we're going to look for this layer and find that LK Fern, you can see a breakdown of where it actually exists. So it looks like they're in these block definitions. So what's nice is I can go ahead and go to my blocks, even if I don't even know where they are, and I can see exactly where it is. So let's go ahead and turn them on. There they are. They're on a frozen layer right here. So being able to do that and simply delete it and purge and see that things removed from the list is super, super helpful. Further, our purge command, PRG, if you're not familiar with that, is very, very good for removing all items that are no longer in the system. So just keep that one in mind as well, so you don't have to go through several clicks. Just type PRG and it'll go. So I think one of the only other things that I really wanted to cover that seem important is block edits, and I'm going to do it on this guy real quick, just so that we understand this whole definition and defined name in here. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to this block real quick. He is one of my tree graphics. And we'll go ahead and pick him up right here. So there are going to be times when we update or improve our blocks, or we as in you, improve those, or things might change. And maybe it's as simple as you had an alteration to the symbol or something like that to make it all additionally pretty. And so you had some changes that you wanted to do to it, and you're like, all right, this is my cool symbol now. So it's saved, and I try to insert him. So let's go here, and I go ahead and I try to place this tree again. And I'm just going to go through land effects because it's a little bit quicker. But he places just like normal. And I accidentally placed 2 very, very quickly. Okay, he places like normal, but how in the world, without deleting all these and purging that block definition out, can I get this to be the new definition? So you can obviously go through our classic insert CAD command to go and find that that tree here and say okay. And if it notices that it's already there, it's going to ask if you want to redefine it. You can say yes, redefine the block, but I'm going to do something faster, and that's our redefine block command. Okay, and redefine block is going to allow us to just simply click a block, and if it finds it in the land effects database or where you've been storing your blocks, it will automatically update and redefine that block for you throughout the drawing. So very, very quickly, you can see what those changes are, making sure you have the latest block for whatever it is, just by simply clicking redefine block. So past that, if you need to alter any names so that it changes it so that you can insert it again, rename is actually kind of a fun little section that actually is has improved quite a bit as well. But being able to see what you have in this drawing, from any dimension styles to layers, to line types, but to be able to select any one of these guys here, see what the old name is, and maybe we want to rename those to um, a, a company name standard or something like that, to be able to very quickly take an existing block and change its name structure over to that new one, is super easy. So that really gets us to the end. If there's any questions, Chair.
Well, we
Plot styles.
yeah, well, I think, well, one was, I think Jeffries did have a good question regarding, he was just kind of wanting some more information on transparency and non-plot. And I think the main thing is just pointing out that those settings in the layer palette, and that's really the best way to juggle them. There used to be a lot of hacks and workarounds and things to get certain things out of AutoCAD, but the layer palette has really evolved to take over pretty much everything. So, for instance, just non-plot being a great example. There's really no need to have a non-plot color anymore. That used to be the way we would do non-plot, and now you can just simply set an entire layer to non-plot. So that it's totally a personal thing. If you want an actual color that prints completely, as non-plot, or just use a entirely non-plot layer. And the same thing for transparency. So it's best to do everything by layer. Just keep it there in the layer, and just be aware of those columns and what they do. Now, if you want to maybe kind of show a little bit of that real quick and see what
Yeah,
happens.
I'll just reiterate what you said, from the standpoint of, as soon as you start getting into paper space and your layout stuff like that, CAD does give you the ability to have you'll see this new kind of columns start appear with this VP, and that's the viewport. And you can have viewport specific transparencies, and line weights and different colors. I will tell you right now, as you go down that rabbit hole, there is so many things that can go wrong just from it looks rather, and which place do I look at? So yes, trying to stay within the realm of, as a layers concern, just in general, to have a global setting. Doesn't mean you can't, obviously, adjust viewport by viewport, because people do like to see certain things off in a viewport but not anywhere else. So being able to activate that viewport and do the lay freeze commands and adjust those items here, is super important, obviously, but just knowing that does kind of open that up to this whole section here, for what it does. But setting specific layers to transparency, this is where I kind of set those XREFs, and kind of select those and set a viewport transparency to that specific viewport to focus on different things. Totally doable there. But then, yeah, what it really comes down to is the plotting. And being able to set these different styles up. And you'll notice that we have 4 different styles. This is our 100% thickness of what we showed today, the line weight page. But each one of these is set to reduce the line weight of that standard one by the 25% there. So being able to set up your own style, and you can modify any of those and save as, make it a new style so you're not hurting your initial one, but then going through and setting those specific colors to the designated style that you want maybe it's for a specific client that needs it to act a different way. So instead of setting up a whole new set of colors and a whole new set of lines and layers and all that kind of stuff, all you need to do is modify a CTB file to make those colors act a little bit different, and you can stay consistent with the colors that you use. So yes, I think we're over. If that
Yeah,
gets us to the end.
I think that definitely takes us to the end. It's a great place to end, and reminder everyone to keep the ideas coming for future content you might like to see in a webinar, and have a wonderful and safe weekend.